What if I told you that looking at something for just 1 second would make you kill yourself instantly? No monster attacks, no virus spreads, no warning signs, just one look, and you're dead. When a mysterious force wipes out most of humanity, a pregnant woman and 2 children must survive in a world where opening your eyes could be the last thing you ever do. Stay until the end, because the final journey through the river is one of the most intense survival scenes ever filmed. The movie opens in a tense present, Malorie, blindfolded, leading 2 small children by hand through a forest toward a river. Tense as a coiled spring and quieter than you'd expect from a person charged with keeping 2 kids alive. From there it's backward and forward in time, showing us how a pregnant woman who wanted almost nothing to do with kids became the only real parent these 2 would have. We flash back to the early days of the catastrophe, when people on the street suddenly start acting like they're possessed and then kill themselves. The cause is never shown directly on camera, literally, because that's the whole point, but the result is unmistakable. Once you see whatever it is, you lose the fight to stay alive. That mystery forces people to become inventive and paranoid in equal measure. Malorie is pregnant and anxious, trying to find a way through a city that now demands blindfolds like their shoes. She ends up in a house with a ragtag group of survivors. A jittery mother, the convinced yet unhelpful neighbors, a calm-ish guy named Tom who becomes a real asset later, and the prickly Douglas, who's the kind of man who keeps his own counsel. At first they're strangers sharing canned food and disbelief. By necessity they become a temporary family. Pregnancy in the middle of the apocalypse is as terrible as it sounds, and Bird Box doesn't sugarcoat it. There's a pregnancy, a birth inside the safe house, and the fragile civility of the group erodes fast. People grieve and snap in different ways. One character takes despair to an extreme and convinces himself that he can cope with seeing the thing. Another tries to use religion as a comforting explanation. Others fall into groups that self-destruct. There's a pretty cruel sequence where a professional does the unthinkable and opens windows or looks out of them, and the consequences ripple through everyone's hope. The house becomes less of a shelter and more of a pressure cooker, with fear, grief, and power struggles boiling over. Malorie reacts by hardening. She's practical and blunt about what must be done, and she makes choices that would look cold to someone who hasn't had to keep people alive under those circumstances. Her relationships here are complicated. Tom is useful and patient and becomes a steady presence, while Douglas pumps the group for resources and information with a poker face that hides something like guilt. People try to make rules. Keep doors boarded, don't go outside without a reason, and for heaven's sake, keep your blindfold on. But rules are fragile when panic sets in. At one point a delivery person or a neighbor makes a terrible error of judgment that shows just how quickly the social contract can evaporate when the world looks like it does in Bird Box. Not all of the movie is bleak. There are moments of bitter humor and human tenderness woven in, the kind of small kindnesses that make it bearable. A joke here or an exasperated comment there keeps us from drowning in doom. But the core premise stays the same. You can't look, you can't know what's out there, and you must learn to trust senses other than sight. People get clever. They invent new ways to check a room, tie ropes to lead someone through town, cover themselves in masks and blindfolds. It becomes almost Amish. The comforts of modern life stripped away, but the social ingenuity turned up to 11. Then there's the river plan. The survivors hear a rumor about a safe place, a community upriver that might be home to people who either never saw the thing or who've adapted in radical ways. Boats are scarce, trust is scarcer, but the idea of a place to anchor your life is powerful. A voyage ensues, and the river trip is basically the second act in microcosm. A crucible that tests strength, loyalty, and sanity. The river is beautiful and merciless. As they travel blindfolded downstream, the group is vulnerable in ways they weren't in the static security of the house. Currents, other humans, and sheer fatigue all conspire to strip away illusion. People freak out. Some remove their blindfolds because the gag of curiosity is apparently still a thing in a post-apocalyptic world. Spoiler. Removing it rarely works out well. Malorie's steely practicality is on full display during the crossing. She's got 2 kids she didn't name yet, just boy and girl, for most of the movie, which is both a grim statement on her emotional distance and a little heartbreaking. She teaches them to hold the rope, to listen for wind and birds and engines, and to never trust the quiet. The children become a sort of moral compass. Their vulnerability forces Malorie to grow in ways she didn't choose. And the movie makes you feel the weight of that. Raising a kid is already hard. Doing it with no sight and constant death pressure is Tolkien-level epic parenting. Along the river they lose people. Some go insane, some make bad choices, and there's the constant dread that anything you see will be your last visual memory. The movie plays cleverly with the idea that humans can be just as dangerous as the unseen entity. There's a sect of survivors who've chosen to blind themselves, reasoning that if sight equals doom, then removing sight is a solution. That's one of the film's more ethically gnarly ideas. It asks whether there are lives worth living if you have to strip away a part of yourself to survive. Some people embrace that. Others can't imagine giving up sight and try to engineer a way to live around the danger instead. There's also a subplot about trust gone wrong. Not everyone you meet is on the same page, and survival makes people selfish, even violent. The movie is merciless about this. Alliances shift like sand. People you thought were friends reveal a darker, more self-preserving side. At least one character betrays the group in a way that costs lives, and that betrayal redefines what Malorie believes about leadership and responsibility. She's not perfect, but she's the one who keeps doing the hard, unglamorous choices. Rationing food, making the kids practice safety drills, and sometimes making decisions you're not allowed to love very much. As the endgame approaches, Malorie, now older and more hardened, decides to take the children on a final leg toward the rumored sanctuary upstream. The journey is tense. Car rides with blindfolds, treks through abandoned towns, and a whole lot of listening for anything that could mean death. Instances of human compassion are threaded into the bleakness. A man who offers up his skills to fix a boat, a woman who shares a memory of life before, a whispered joke that lands like a life preserver. You want to root for them. The movie does, too. It gives you breathers where the characters laugh, argue, or complain about small things like how weird food tastes now, which is oddly comforting. There's a moment of near tragedy that underlines the movie's core rule: curiosity kills. Someone's curiosity or arrogance prompts them to look, and the results are swift and merciless. The film doesn't rely on gore, it relies on implication and reaction. You see the aftermath more than the action, and your imagination does the heavy lifting. That's smart filmmaking, because it keeps the horror personal and psychological. The threat is tailored to each viewer, and to each character, often reflecting their worst fear or deepest regret. Malorie's journey is as psychological as physical. She starts out emotionally closed off, refusing to name the children because names carry responsibilities. By the end, whether you call it healing or acceptance, she opens up in small but meaningful ways. Finally, they reach the sanctuary, not a fortress, but a community that has adapted in a surprising way. It's home to people who live without sight by choice or by circumstance, and it's perhaps the kind of compromise that the world demands. The residents have found a way to construct a life that doesn't require visual validation. They've fashioned a social order around other senses: sound, touch, routine. It's oddly peaceful, which is the point. Malorie learns that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about finding ways to carry on living with dignity. The children, who have spent their entire short lives masked and instructed, get something like a childhood there, cautious, strange, but real. There's an emotional payoff that doesn't depend on a big cinematic twist. Malorie, who bristles at sentiment and mistrusts tenderness, finally names the kids. It's a small act that signifies everything: acceptance, attachment, and the kind of love that makes you expose yourself to risk because the alternative is a life of perpetual armor. The film makes a quiet argument that love is riskier than sight. You get attached, your defenses drop, but you also get a reason to keep going. The last scenes are quieter than you'd expect from an apocalypse movie. There's no triumphant march, just a slow, human settling into a new normal, with Malorie holding the children's hands as they move through a space that doesn't require eyesight to appreciate. It's tender and worth the whole messy ride. Bird Box thrives on the tension between seen and unseen, between human fragility and resilience. It's not a perfect movie. There are plot conveniences and a few moments where character motivation skews thin, but it's emotionally honest about the costs of survival. Sandra Bullock's Malorie anchors the story with a kind of taut intensity. You can feel the wear and the weight behind every blink she refuses to take. The supporting players make the world feel lived in and immediate, full of people whose choices are sometimes maddening but never cheap. If there's a takeaway beyond, don't look at the scary thing, it's that community matters even when people aren't great at being human. Bird Box suggests that in a world without safety nets, families, whether blood-based or hand-formed, are the units that persist. It's also a film that loves small, tactile details. Learning to feed a baby by sound and touch. Tying knots that will hold in rough water. The way a familiar voice can anchor you when everything else is chaos. Those small details make the big moments hit harder. So if you watch it, you'll go with Malorie from a cramped house to a boat to a riverside refuge, through losses and stubborn survival. You'll see how the simple act of naming a child can mean everything after everything else has been stripped away. And you might laugh a little at the absurdity of some moments and wince at the cruelty of others. But mostly you'll be watching people do what humans do best when the map burns. They keep finding ways to keep going. Not an easy movie to forget, and oddly, in its own dark way, quietly hopeful. That's the terrifying story of Bird Box. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more horror movie recaps every week. One question before you go. Would you survive in the world of Bird Box? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next recap.